With the story of Dead Rising 2, it really is its own special brand, and it doesn't overshadow Dead Rising 1 or make you forget it in any sense, but it still leaves the same, if not more, impact. First, let's start off with the characters. You got Chuck Green, who is a totally different protagonist than Frank West. Where Frank West was quippy yet still serious, Chuck is quippy and serious in a different way. Chuck Green definitely has his own sense of humor, don't get me wrong. But if you compare it to Frank West and what Frank West had personally at stake, Chuck Green is all about protecting his daughter and making sure she does not succumb to the zombie infection. And as far as ending variability goes, with Dead Rising 1, you had more of a sense of different outcomes that kind of just felt like they didn't have so much pressure, but you can make the decision. Dead Rising 2 has a lot of endings also, but only two really satisfy once you understand that Chuck needs to clear his name and save his daughter. Like, I recommend you play through the Dead Rising 2 campaign and then look at all the endings and just see how tragic they all are, with the exception of two: Ending S and Ending A. And since Ending S with overtime mode is actually not canon, and Ending A is the one that leads into Dead Rising Case West, I'm going to go with the canon ending and explain it. I even played Dead Rising Case West to add the context, because that will be the overtime mode. And you know what? I actually like it this way, because the overtime mode in Dead Rising 2, they spelt it out for you, and it wasn't necessarily all that bad. Just the way of getting things surrounded in the city just mimics so hard the overtime of Dead Rising 1. And of course, you're being taunted by a total psychopath that's not supposed to make any sense. He's probably just doing it all for his own amusement. It just didn't feel as crazy as it did when I was playing Dead Rising 1. Now both scenarios are absolutely insane, but I just felt like the Dead Rising 1 gathering of the items just made more sense to me. But when you get Ending A and then choose Case West, it just kind of adds a little more variety to how you can play out a finale of a game or a chapter for a character. But every other ending is just an absolute tragedy to me, so it kind of, with my conscience, took away the variety in the ending scenario as to Dead Rising 1. But let's get on with explaining the story and why it's so great. We start off with Chuck Green doing a Terror is Reality game show, because the world has evolved to such a standard now. Zombies are the norm. They're making brands around it. They're making protest groups surrounded about it. It really is a big deal, and it has infected the world and American culture as we know it. But Chuck Green is doing this not because he wants to, but because it's the way that he can make money to support his daughter financially, which would be a heavy tax because of the heavily priced Zombrex that she has to take every single day. Zombrex is the drug that has been made after Dead Rising 1 that you injected into Frank when he got infected. And there's a huge commentary about big pharmaceuticals and driving up prices, things that are very expensive that you need in order to keep your health in check. And the story really puts a heavy emphasis on how Zombrex has affected people who are dependent on it, and some people have just given up on life because waiting for a shot every 24 hours to avoid the inevitable just seemed unbelievable. And I couldn't blame those people. That is not a way I would want to live my life. The quality of my life would be done. But after the reality show, which you either win or lose, a zombie outbreak goes out, and then you guys get to the safe house. You see the carnage that is the Fortune City outbreak, and then after getting Katie some Zombrex, you learn that Chuck Green is the prime suspect via the TV, even though Chuck knows he has nothing to do with it. So he sets out on a quest to go clear his name, and he meets up with Rebecca Chang in the Fortune City Hotel, where they go on a little scavenger hunt. And it's not enough to convince Rebecca Chang that he is not behind the outbreak, but it entices her. Now, Rebecca Chang is definitely probably one of my favorite characters, because she is such a far cry from Frank West. She is that little bit of Frank West they wanted to make sure was in Dead Rising 2 before they came out with Case West. Just like Stacy Forsythe is probably one of the best long-distance companions, a good follow-up to Otis, and Katie is there to overshadow the urgency and really bring out your paternal instinct as a gamer. You got guys like Sullivan, who I'll get to him later, but they add stuff. TK, who you learn is behind the outbreak, or so you think. In fact, after the first line of quests, you go out and you learn that TK has something to do with the outbreak, and he is not willing to just come willingly and admit that he himself did it. In fact, he's more than happy to let you take the fall. So you go on a long distance chase underground, you catch up to him for a short time, but you find out that TK is up to something in the city. The next morning, after another case of Zombrex for Katie, you end up seeing that he is mining every bank in Fortune City. Now, is it about money? I don't know, but it leads to other things. So you stop the trucks, and then Rebecca says, I will show you my source, and you can meet with us. You realize that the source is, of course, the twins from the Terror's reality game show, the Supermodels. Now, these two are just walking innuendos, and they are a heck of a boss fight. I actually had a lot of fun fighting these people, and their downfall was the utmost satisfying. But after learning that they are involved in this, Rebecca is 100% convinced that you had nothing to do with the outbreak. So you guys do a stakeout. You find TK trying to escape the city with a helicopter, but you stop him, bring him back to the safe house, and then the next day you wait for the military to arrive, and you have your evidence. You have TK in custody, but a plot twist, and this is what I love. Remember in the first one when you had to deal with special forces? Instead, when the military shows up, because how are they going to cover this up? The world knows about zombies. What next can the game throw at you? Green gas comes from the vents and ends up creating super gas zombies who are hyper aggressive, hyper strong, and they are a force to be reckoned with. You do not want to get cornered by a group of these people. They actually added that new sense of fear of going out. They actually made Fortune City from something I looked forward to going out into to something I wanted to plan every step out because of the potential hazards. And you don't get their weakness, which is a sound gun, until a little bit later. But as you rescue Rebecca Chang from another psychopath who is a soldier who got PTSD on the spot from seeing his men be torn apart from gas zombies, you go back into the tunnels to find out what is going on with the green gas. Long behold, you find a Phenotrans facility, the makers of Zombrex, the big pharmaceutical companies who have started this outbreak so they could harvest queens. TK was just a pawn in a bigger game, and he was more than happy to play along with his payment. And yes, they were all willing to let Chuck Green take the fall for it, but Chuck gets his evidence and then brings it over to Stacy, brings it over to Rebecca, only to realize that there's one more stone that has not yet been turned, and you get Sullivan, and he is a Phenotrans agent who was their last resort in case anything else went wrong, and he is there to stop the evidence from coming out, make sure you guys don't make it out. They can continue making this the Chuck Green outbreak, and they could get away and move forward and cause more outbreaks so they could keep their big pharmaceutical scam running. And Sullivan was probably one of my favorite bosses. Now, he is super difficult, especially the way I had to fight him. Usually I was able to front kick him and use a defiler to take him out, but those just didn't work in the code for some reason, so I had to time front kicks for a while. It took me quite a while to take him out, and I had to really time him out, but that challenge was fun for me. But he is probably the best final boss just because of the threat he brought. But after you beat Sullivan, you hook his lower body to the floor while the sky crane comes to take him away, and it severs him in half. Then you choose whether or not you want to give TK Zombrex, because in the game, when the zombies get into the underground facility, TK basically got bit. And this is what's going to lead into the differentiations between ending A and ending S. Now, ending S leads into overtime, because if you give TK Zombrex, guess what? He's a villain. He's going to kidnap Stacy and Katie, but that's why I chose ending A, because ending A, you get stopped by a zombie TK, and it appears that Chuck Green is going to be left behind while everyone else escapes to safety, Katie being in the custody of Stacy Forsythe, Rebecca being shot. It just seems like a big jumbled up mess, and ending A for a minute didn't have any value, but it leads into Case West, which is the DLC that they brought in, and then you get the Kanan lore where Chuck Green and Frank go into a Phenotrans facility to meet Frank's source, which is Isabella Keys. You meet the leader of the Phenotrans facility, you get the evidence you need, you defeat an enforcer who is highly deadly, and roll credits, everything is okay. And I enjoyed Case West because it took an ending that seemed very tragic to me and actually brought it out as the Kanan ending that actually makes literal sense. But what can I say about this story just being absolutely insane? It added new layers, it got creative with the dangers it presented, aka the gas zombies. I never expected something like that to happen, and they chose to be super creative with it. Of course, there were twists and turns of people behind other things. The mystery this time was a lot deeper. It had a lot more twists and turns. The Dead Rising 1 had mystery to it too, but we weren't ready for the Dead Rising 1 lore and just what the formula was. So when we were given our first course, Dead Rising 2 was that second course that was even better and took what we loved and kind of put a better spin on it that we weren't expecting. A different pace, different feel. It wasn't bad. It didn't overshadow Dead Rising 1, but it was its own thing. It had a great commentary about pharmaceutical companies and how we are dependent on medicines to keep us going, disease, everything like that, whatnot. And it amplified just the universe and expanded it, because you got protest groups like Cure who fight for zombie rights because they still see zombies as people. You see journalists running around and working around zombie outbreaks and still trying super hard to keep their sources secret, because it's a game changer for modern journalism when different things come out. They have reasons to keep their secrets, you have reasons to keep yours. And the person who is super suspicious, like Sullivan, ends up being super suspicious like Sullivan. It all just kind of tended to show the battle between good and evil, and Chuck was probably one of my favorite protagonists. He's not going to take Frank West's spot, but he definitely had his own personal stake. His journey was very personal. It wasn't just about getting a story or uncovering a mystery. It was about family. It was about connection. It was about building relationships, losing relationships, becoming friends with people only to be betrayed by them later, and then watching him clash with Frank West in Case West was probably one of my favorite things. Like watching these two interact, because I view this as a DLC, like the true ending was awesome because they're fighting some moments, a lot of moments they didn't get along, but near the end you could tell that they really had a mutual respect for each other just after 24 hours of interacting with each other. But all in all, the Dead Rising 2 campaign, the Dead Rising 2 story, whatever you want to call it, story mode, whatever ending you want to go with, I think that overall this game is a worthy sequel. It didn't overshadow the first game at all, but it was its own thing. It kept the lore going, it kept everything relevant, but it also just had such a satisfying feel that is so different from the first that I can forgive that Dead Rising 3 was a little lackluster to a lot of people's eyes. Now, when I make my Dead Rising 3 review, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be very negative about it, but I am going to go into, in my story aspects of it, just what I feel went wrong, or if it was just Dead Rising 2 and Dead Rising 1 being so awesome that it was hard to follow up with Dead Rising 3, because I actually ended up liking Dead Rising 3. But that's a topic for another day. What were your thoughts on the story? I will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching this two-parter, and I'll see you around.